Hey Guy, today we will be coming together to a topic that very many people know. That is cowboys. Surely you have heard many stories and watched many films about them already, right? So today let's find out where the origin of cowboys came from. Please listen to the entire story. If you find it good, please like, share, and follow the channel to hear many more great stories. In the waning days of the 17th century, as the European world spun in the whirlwind of exploration and colonization, the vast lands to the west of the North American continent remained an untapped, fertile canvas. From the boundless heights of the Rocky Mountains to the endless plains stretching out before them, the harsh climate and rugged terrain created a natural world both majestic and equally brutal. It was here, among wild herds of cattle concealed in the reeds along the rivers, that the very first seeds of the Wild West cowboy image began to take root. At first, it was not the English, but the Spanish colonists who brought livestock into New Spain, the territory stretching from Mexico all the way to what is now California. They carried cattle, horses and sheep across the ocean, laying the foundation for high plain ranching. Among these animals, the Iberian cattle breed, prized for its rugged endurance and high fertility, quickly went feral once released to roam the New World. It was these wild herds that later gave rise to the distinctive longhorns, their broad curved horns becoming today's emblem of the American West. Alongside the livestock, the Spanish brought with them an entire ranching culture of the vaquero, the direct precursor to the American cowboy. From cowhide chaps, intricately decorated saddles, to the lariat, lasso, of leather rope knotted snugly around the wrist, the vaquero embodied the perfect fusion of riding technique, cattle control, and the graceful art of riding maneuvers. The thunder of horse hooves across the untamed plains, accompanied by the jingle of cattle neck bells, created a distinctive symphony of early Western ranch life. When US territory expanded westward after gaining independence, a massive wave of migrants from the east poured in. They arrived with dreams of getting rich through cattle ranching, undeterred by the lurking dangers, raids by Native American tribes, the remnants of bloody conflicts, scorching deserts to be crossed, and rushing silt-laden rivers to wade through. They imported the vaqueros' ranching styles and techniques, gradually forging the image of the North American cowboy. Wide-brimmed hats to shield from the sun, durable denim jackets, sturdy leather boots and protective gloves. Ranches, scattered across Texas, New Mexico and Arizona, began to appear. Each ranch was its own kingdom, ruled by the ranchero, the landowner. They recruited young men as free as the wind and as fearless as lions. All they needed was the ability to ride and to break cattle. Their job was to drive cattle, to herd the herds from grazing grounds to gathering points, where traders would buy them and move them southward, or load them onto ships bound for populous markets like New Orleans or Chicago. The cattle drive was a long journey that could last for months. At dawn, when dew still clung to the prairie, the cowboys rode in formation, led by the trail boss, the leader whose experience kept the herd in line. The rhythmic thud of hobnails on saddles echoed across the grasslands. They faced dangers from nature, sandstorms, forks of lightning tearing the sky, or wild coyotes stalking young calves. At night, around the glowing campfire, the burn of whiskey warmed their bellies as they swapped war stories and simple country tunes drifted on the air. The camaraderie among men of different blood was their true bond, an invisible chain uniting free spirits. By the mid-19th century, the cowboys' golden age truly flourished. The allure of the cattle industry became overwhelming. Beef prices on the East Coast soared, and transport demand rose ever higher. However, the traditional transport routes using ox carts with wooden parts that wore out over time could no longer keep up. To solve this, new trails were opened. The Chisholm Trail, the Goodnight Loving Trail. Each route stretched over 1,000 miles, crossing parched states or vast expanses of tall grass. Signatures and promises were exchanged on weathered rolls of cattle hide, contracts between traders and rancheros, marking the beginning of the true era of cattle commerce. In spring, the herd began to graze on the fresh grass sprouting after the harsh winter. calves born healthy were the economic future of each ranch. Cowboys had to inspect each individual, wounds, signs of disease, or injuries from wild beasts. They used a dagger to trim the cattle's tail and applied a branding as an identification mark, preventing the cattle from getting lost or stolen. The act of lightly burning the hide to create a unique symbol for each ranch wasn't just a legal formality, but a source of pride. A tradition passed down from generation to generation. By the end of the 19th century, when the railroad stretched across the continent, the cattle drive gradually gave way to transport by train. The sight of herds of 1,000 cattle crossing the plains became rarer, replaced by trains laden with frozen beef. The image of the cowboy promptly became a romantic symbol, celebrated in poetry and recreated in film. Yet during that brief span, the cowboy's image was firmly etched into the American mind, a symbol of freedom, adventure, and the yearning to conquer nature. In the next part, we will delve deeper into the everyday stories of those cowboys, friendships, clashes with outlaws, and how the scorching summers tested their courage. But right here, from the very first steps, from the wild lands and Iberian livestock to the interminable cattle drives, it all wove together the pristine portrait of Wild West cowboy history, their origins and indomitable spirit, destined to live on forever in frontier legend. Sunrise gradually climbed over the vast prairie, tinting the pale greenish bronze onto the thin veil of dew still clinging to the grass. When the first light of day dispelled the night, the cowboy silhouettes bustled again, preparing for their daily tasks, tending the cattle, repairing saddles and bridles, and cleaning up the camp. Kitchen smoke hovered, carrying the aroma of dark brown coffee, the indispensable drink on cold mornings, mingled with the scent of straw smoke and horsehide, creating a flavour found only in the Wild West. Morning work. Each man had his own duty. Some cowboys released the cattle into the fields, one held the horse reins, another cleaned the food boxes and stored the dry rations. The trail boss, the group's commander, usually reviewed the new day's plan, checked the prairie map, estimated the distance to cover, and determined the next night's campsite. At times he would invite a greenhorn to join the cowboy circle, teaching basic skills, how to tie a lasso knot, how to recognise wild animal tracks in the grass, how to choose the right size saddle, and how to set the stirrups securely. Friendship and discipline. Amid a life of constant movement, the friendships among cowboys grew tighter than ever. They had no families nearby, only each other to share joys, fatigue, and danger. When night fell, after a stew of beef and potatoes with charred edges, the strum of an acoustic guitar rang through the camp. Western folk songs, telling of cavalry soldiers, of tragic, unfulfilled love, rose under the twinkling stars. Someone would sing, another would reply, then the whole group would join in. It was a ritual that bound their souls, easing the tension after hours spent balanced in the saddle. However, discipline remained unwavering. No one was allowed to drink to excess, and no one dared abandon their post while driving the herd. Any mistake could plunge the entire group into danger. Cattle straying off course, horses bolting, or ill-intentioned men taking advantage of a lapse to attack. Because of this, no matter how well they knew one another, every cowboy had to abide by the rule. Only act on orders. Without orders, hold your position. Hazards from nature. The Western Plains tested men not only with their vast terrain, but also with unpredictable weather. In summer, dust storms could sweep in without warning, engulfing both cattle and horses in a thick veil of dust, forcing the trail to halt and make camp for days. To cope, the trail boss would order the horses into low-lying ground, find shelter, lash down saddles, and tie down equipment to keep it from blowing away. Winter, by contrast, brought brutal frost and deep snow. During severe freezes, cattle's legs could become encased in ice, horses would slip and fall, and the campsite turned into a cold, barren scape. The campfire became salvation. Cowboys had to keep the fire roaring to stay warm, dry their gear, and brew hot tea for the group. Encounters and conflicts with native peoples. On a journey stretching hundreds of miles, it was impossible to avoid passing through the territories of Native American tribes. Relations between the two sides could be peaceful or tense. Some trail bosses knew how to negotiate, trading old weapons or dry rations for safe passage through lands laced with game traps and hidden ravines. They respected local customs and broke camp when they saw signs of native ceremonies. However, when outlaws crossed the line, ambushing for plunder or rustling cattle, conflict erupted. Fierce battles with thrown spears and arrows whistling through the air left bloody marks on everyone's memory, a stark reminder that the West was not only a ranching paradise but truly a lawless land. Camp life work wasn't always tied to the long trail. When the group paused at a large ranch, the Cowboys got a few days' rest. They pitched in with chores, repairing wooden fences, washing clothes and cleaning the stables. Women, if present at the camp, handled cooking and tended to newcomers and the wounded. Native children or the ranchero's own kids would run around, learning to ride alongside their older brothers from afar. It was a moment when they felt the warmth of family and community before setting off again on the long cattle drive. Bounty hunters and turning the tables. Beyond natural hazards and ethnic tensions, Cowboys faced another threat: the outlaws, bandits and murderers in hiding. When an escapee slipped across the border, authorities hired bounty hunters to track them down. Sometimes a genuine cowboy crew would also claim the reward to root out the outlaws. A showdown between a seasoned hunter and a reckless bandit, under the blazing sun on Main Street, dust drifting over the saddle, became the stuff of Eastern newspaper headlines enthralling city readers. Spirit and legend. Through every trial, from dust storms and bitter cold to gunfights, the cowboy spirit never wavered. They lived by the motto, independent but not lonely, brave but not reckless. The influence of the Spanish vaquero, the organised ranch system, and deep camaraderie helped them survive and turn the West into a mighty kingdom of beef. In that era, the cowboy image was indelibly stamped into American culture, on paintings, in Eastern books, and later on the silver screen in films of the decades that followed. Finally, when the Cowboys quietly left the ranch to continue driving the herd to market, they left behind more than just hoof prints and wagon wheel ruts. They left everyday stories, friendships, and perseverance against the harsh elements. Those fragments of memory would be retold, embellished, and passed down, creating the legend of the lone cowboy, a lone rider across endless plains, wide-brimmed hat turned toward the sunset, revolver at his side, heart proudly gazing toward the horizon. As the sun first peeked over the horizon, the wooden gates of the ranch swung open, revealing the mist-cloaked trail. The breeze of dawn carried the scent of damp straw, and the steady thud of hooves like the pulsing heartbeat of the West. Quang looked around, the young cowboy's hand tightening on the reins, his heart both racing with excitement and tightening with fears he'd never known. He left the safety of the stable behind and stepped into the wild expanse, where the cattle murmured in the morning mist. Each cow was like a little monarch, awaiting orders to be driven hundreds of miles. He recalled the trail boss's warning: don't let the herd spread out too far, and always keep an eye on the calves. It was his first time driving the herd, and every step of Quang's horse was careful, afraid that a sudden bolt might throw the herd into chaos. The trail wound along the riverbank, where lush green grass stretched as far as the eye could see. Beneath the horse's hooves, the ground was soft and muddy with dew, interspersed with deer tracks and trickling streams. Quang felt every breath of the purebred Spanish horse he'd been assigned. It must have carried vaqueros through the harshest lands, and now shouldered the responsibility of leading the cattle through the mangrove forest. He whispered softly, "Come on, my friend," as if to bolster both the horse's courage and his own. A wind chime rang out from the neck of the lead cow. The herd immediately moved, weaving through the riverbank thickets, the sound of hooves striking loose stones forming a rapid-fire melody. Quang leaned over, used his lasso to rope in a calf separated from its mother, and pulled it into the centre of the herd. Sweat dotted his brow, but a proud smile spread across his face as he realised he had just passed his first test. The bond between man, horse, and cattle felt stronger than ever. At midday, the rest stop lay at the foot of a low hill, where a few reddish-brown trees cast cool shade. He and his teammates spread a coarse blanket on the ground, sharing pieces of cornbread and bowls of cool water. No one spoke much, only the wind rustling through leaves and the buzzing of insects. It was a rare moment of stillness, an opportunity for him to listen to the breath of the West, to feel that he was not just someone seeking opportunity, but someone welcomed by nature. But the West was not always so gentle. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a black cloud from the north rushed in, carrying the low rumble of thunder. The storm arrived suddenly, turning the sky into a sheet of grey. The trail boss signalled to quickly pitch a temporary camp. Tarps were stretched overhead. The campfire immediately blazed to life, its flames dancing on the faces of the leather-clad men, their eyes alight with determination not to let the tempest halt their journey. Amid the pelting hail and howling wind, Quang sat by the fire, his hair plastered wet against his forehead, his hands still tending to the horse. He deftly wiped the layer of mud clinging to the leather saddle, checked its hooves, then bent close to listen to its rapid breathing. A train of thoughts suddenly brought back old memories, mischievous pranks with his friends in the fields of his homeland, and the yearning for freedom like the legendary Cowboys. And now, in the midst of the storm, he truly understood that freedom always goes hand in hand with responsibility and courage. Early the next morning, after the storm had passed, the ground lay soaked with patchy puddles. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, bathing everything in a brilliant golden glow. The muddy trail bore the marks of a wolf pack's passage, large footprints and bits of gnawed bone left behind. The trail boss warned everyone to stay vigilant, and the Cowboys tightened their formation, eyes fixed on the brush lining the path. As they moved on, Quang heard hooves that didn't belong to their herd. A figure flickered through a gap in the forest. He quickly signalled his teammates to take cover behind a sand dune. A group of bounty hunters emerged, faces smeared with mud, revolvers levelled in their hands. They were pursuing a criminal hiding in the thicket. Their presence made the air oppressive, and the peaceful sounds of the West suddenly shifted into rapid, urgent breaths. No one wanted an armed confrontation, but retreat was not an option either. The trail boss calmly ordered everyone to hold their positions while raising his hand in greeting to avoid any misunderstanding. After a tense moment, the bounty hunters realised the Cowboys were merely passing through, nodded in farewell, and continued tracking the criminal. Quang exhaled, acutely aware of the thin line between danger and safety. As evening fell and the sun painted the horizon a fiery red, the Cowboys made camp on the gentle riverbank. He slipped off his leather boots and dipped his feet into the cool water, letting the aches and fatigue wash away. The soft lapping of the water mixed with the chirping of crickets. The campfire crackled again, its smoke weaving into the night breeze. Quang leaned back against his saddle and gazed up at the star-filled sky. Each star felt like a reminder that the story of the Wild West cowboy was far from over, with many challenges and wonders still waiting to be uncovered. In that silent night, a powerful conviction rose in his heart. Though the journey remained arduous, the moments of unity with nature, with his comrades and with himself, would be forever etched in his memory. The legend of the young cowboy leading the herd for the first time had officially begun, and countless chapters still awaited to be written in this boundless land. When the first cattle drive cruise finally drew to a close, and the Cowboys grew accustomed to the rhythm of prairie life, a new golden age opened up. The era of haphazard law enforcement, towns springing up like mushrooms after rain, and power struggles along borderlands with no fixed fences. From the town of Abilene, Kansas, where the first cattle-laden train arrived in 1867, to Dodge City along the Long Trail, the West became a stage for merciless showdowns. Abilene, with its row upon row of saloons and gambling halls, quickly became emblematic of a cowboy's transient existence. After months on the trail with the herd, they flocked to bars where a tinkling piano, clinking whiskey glasses, and raucous laughter drowned out the sound of hooves outside. In just a few short days, a cowboy could blow his entire earnings from selling cattle. Weary men sought out dance halls, where showgirls twirled by candlelight to lively Western folk tunes. Some struck it rich at the gaming tables. Others sank into debt and were chased by creditors down muddy streets. Amid the chaos, formal law was almost non-existent. Establishing a local police force lagged behind, and most towns relied on flimsy town marshals to keep the peace. Many marshals were ex-Civil War soldiers, versed in firearms and strict discipline, but inexperienced in civilian matters. They had to learn quickly how to break up brawls among drunken cowboys or capture daring cattle rustlers. Personal weapons were always worn at the hip, from six-shooters to lever-action rifles, so even minor disputes could escalate into gunfights. Not only Abilene, but towns like Wichita, Dodge City, and Wichita Falls became fertile ground for entrepreneurs. They built holding pens for cattle, watering stations, and feed depots, all served by expanding rail lines. Merchants from Chicago and New York clamoured for Texas Longhorn beef at premium prices. Cattle cars snaked across the plains, crossed the Colorado Plateau, and unloaded at canneries on the East Coast, transforming the West into the nation's beef supplier. Under the simple wooden facades, cultural life also began to bloom. Newspapers like the Western Free Press and the Dodge City Times printed poems and short stories chronicling the exploits of Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and Wyatt Earp. In those pages, the cowboy image evolved from a rugged cattle hand into an outlaw hero or a champion of justice. Tales brimming with bullets, and often embellished beyond belief, planted the seeds of Wild West mythology. Alongside literature, travelling theatres and string bands toured the small towns, bringing short plays, upbeat vamp music and quadrille dances. At night, dance floors shook to fiddle and banjo, letting both cowboys and townsfolk forget their hardships. It was then they donned linen vests, fancy hats and polished boots, an elegant contrast to their dust-caked trail attire. In that lively atmosphere, shootouts became a must-have attraction. Dodge City's Main Street once hosted a duel between Marshal Bat Masterson and a local tough. Legend has it Masterson subdued the outlaw with just 3 shots, prompting the crowd to cheer. The sight of 2 men facing off, eyes locked on barrels, became living legend. And every cowboy wanted to prove, if you never draw your gun, how will you know who you are in the West? Yet life wasn't all gunfire and gambling debts. The first settler families brought agricultural culture. They planted wheat, corn, and vegetables near streams or irrigation ditches. Children learned to read in one-room wooden schools run by volunteer teachers. County judges appeared to settle land disputes and delineate rights between native tribes and newcomers. Gradually the West tamed itself. Stone-paved roads, wooden bridges spanned rivers, and frontier outposts controlled migration. Most important of all, the railroad erased the border between East and West. By the 1880s, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads met at Promontory Summit, Utah, completing the first transcontinental railroad. What once took months on horseback or by ox cart now took days by rail. Cattle no longer needed to walk the trail, and the traditional cattle drive began to fade. Thus ended the true era of the horseback cowboy, yielding to modern ranching industry. But the spirit of that time never faded. The freedom, pride, and resilience of the cattlemen, and their life stories, from the greenhorn learning to ride to the wealthy ranch baron, entered literature and film. Early 20th century movies, from The Great Train Robbery, 1903, to John Ford's westerns, portrayed the West as a land of destiny and discovery. The echo of hoofbeats blended with the whistle of steam locomotives, creating an eternal frontier symphony. In the next part, we will revisit the most famous figures of the cowboy era, from Wyatt Earp to Calamity Jane, Jesse James to Butch Cassidy, and explore how they shaped the legend of the West. We will also look closely at the daily lives of the women around the cattle camps, keepers of the home fires, managers of domestic affairs, and sometimes gun-toting equals to the men. Their stories lend vibrant colour to the living history of this endless frontier. In the hastily built wooden houses lining the railroad tracks, the figure of Wyatt Earp emerged like a living legend. He was not the mild-mannered marshal, but a man who dared to use grit and intelligence to bend justice to his will. When Earp first set foot in Dodge City, where no law was practically a slogan, he trained himself with stray bullets, observing how opponents loaded, how they aimed and squeezed the trigger, and vowing never to let his hand shake. Under his command, order ceased to be a luxury. It became a commodity purchasable with steely resolve and solid-soled boots. Calamity Jane was altogether different. Born Martha Jane Cannery, she earned a nickname more fitting for a whirlwind than a woman. Jane carried broad shoulders, a husky voice, and a smile bright as post-rain western sunlight. She could outride any male colleague, slide cartridges into a six-shooter in an instant, and spin yarns by the campfire with humour and drama interwoven. They said Calamity Jane once saved a tour group from a pack of starving wolves, then downed an entire keg of whiskey to prove her courage matched any man's. Meanwhile, Jesse James and the James Younger gang spread terror along the rail lines. They were no ordinary thieves, but symbols of those who, disillusioned with post-war government, took the law into their own hands. With homemade masks and keen revolvers, Jesse and his brother Frank seemed to live in a lawless realm where justice was endlessly delayed and only the strong prevailed. Yet even among outlaws, few realised that beneath those muscular frames lay a fierce devotion to the lost Southern cause. Along the creek in front of the ranch yard, paddles splashed rhythmically in wash tubs. There the ranch women, wives, mothers, sisters and daughters of the Cowboys, prepared the evening meal for the entire household. They not only oversaw cooking, but managed the stables, kept the ledgers, and negotiated wheat prices with traders. Cotton dresses with tiny floral prints, bright white aprons, and the scent of home-baked bread painted a tranquil scene, a sharp contrast to the gunfights raging just streets away. In their eyes shone resilience and hope, symbols of the will to build and preserve a home in the wilderness. Many Western women shed prejudice to stand shoulder to shoulder with men. Annie Oakley, with her uncanny marksmanship, captivated audiences in travelling shows. Whenever she raised her Winchester, hands steady, eyes focused, the crowd fell into stunned silence. Annie's fame not only brought her honour, but opened doors for Western women to prove they were more than delicate hands for fishing rods or knitting needles. They could be heroes amid harsh frontiers. In a corner of the camp, children followed their mothers, learning to split firewood, tend corn, and store water in wooden barrels. They feared neither cold winds nor frost, only sparkling with excitement at the legendary stories their Farmosti. Parents told of Buffalo Bill and the Lakota. When night fell, the family gathered by the fire. The mother's fiddle painted nostalgic melodies, while children's laughter pealed like hope for the future. Yet there were shadows that could not be erased. In the flickering candlelight of a shabby inn, people gambled their last coins, clinging to luck for a fresh start. Glasses were refilled, curses flew when bets went awry. Many times women had to shoulder an entire ranch when husbands vanished in a shootout, faced hanging sentences, or even lost their lives in gunfire. They bore silent pain, but also a fierce will to survive, holding their homes and children together against life's storms. When autumn's golden leaves fell, ranchers and their families gathered for the harvest festival. It was a rare chance to banish worries over beef prices and legal hurdles. They shared joy that branding marks stayed clear through storms, that cattle values held steady, and that rail fares hadn't risen. Drum beats on cowhides mingled with banjo strings, producing a lively quadrille beneath a crystal sky. Everyone danced, shedding burdens, embracing the truth that the West was not just a frozen frontier, but a land where people shared and cared for one another. Amid that scene, the tale of the cowboy era, not only astride horses or in gunfights, but in a woman's steady gaze, a child's bright smile, and nights by the campfire, continued to be written by the warmth of family and unwavering faith in tomorrow. Thus, the legend of the West grew richer and more complex, Not merely a chase in a dust cloud, but an epic of souls who faced hardship with courage and extended humanity across the boundless wilderness. Sunset descended upon the west like a purple velvet cloak, draping over the withered yellow grasses left after the dry season. A gentle breeze carried the scent of dry grass and campfire smoke from the small ranches along the railway. It was at this very moment that the great transformation of the cattle industry began to appear, quietly yet irreversibly. Along the Colorado-Texas border, barbed wire fences crisscrossed the hillsides. Barbed wire, Joseph Glidden's 1874 invention, was not merely steel twisted around wooden posts, but also the death knell for the free-roaming life of the longhorn cattle. When spring arrived and fresh grass blanketed the prairie, the rancher no longer opened gates to let cattle wander and graze, but instead herded them into enclosures surrounded by fences. Fields were parcelled into clearly defined plots, small tracts of land where wheat fields replaced open grazing, turning the once Wild West into a sharply delineated network. The advent of fencing also brought on range wars, conflicts between landowners and itinerant cowboys. Long nights echoed with gunfire as seasoned ranchers strove to thwart cattle rustlers who sneaked in to cut barbed wire, set the herds astray, and plot to resell them. Many cowboys, unwilling to abandon their nomadic way of life, still sought to drive herds across the fences, resulting in bloody disputes at boundary markers and bounty hunters hired to secure possession all the way to the ranch. In the local newspapers, the image of private lawmen on horseback recurred, revolvers heavy on their belts, lying in wait to catch those who cut the wire. Their silhouettes were cast against the wooden walls of the few saloons, proof of the final days of the open range. The wild grass now bore horse prints bound by chains, with no chance for free roaming. The clang of cattle neck bells resounded through every crossroads, signalling that the herds had to pass through narrow gates and were carefully counted each night. Economic changes also drove ranchers to mechanize their operations. Wind-powered grass cutters, automatic water pumps, tin-roofed fireproof barns, and feed storage warehouses gradually replaced simple tree bark shacks. Tracts of land spanning tens of thousands of acres were now divided into multiple parcels with clear ownership, recorded in land deeds. The cattle trade continued to thrive, but the image of the cowboy riding alongside his herd across open fields became a legend, appearing only in paintings and books. But the West did not completely yield to the march of progress. On remote ranches, hundreds of miles from the railroad, wooden gates still creaked whenever cowboys from neighbouring camps came to visit. They shared old stories of nights when blizzards struck, campfires blazing, cattle huddled close to the fence, and men scraping snow off their saddles to save each animal. Though barbed wire stood in their way, camaraderie and the spirit of freedom could not be condemned. Amid these changes, the eldest son of a small ranch named Samuel quietly fitted a chain brace to his saddle so that fences would not douse the campfire's flames when night fell. He believed that no matter how life changed, the cowboy's essence, daring to face challenges and loving the natural world, would remain unbowed. Each morning Samuel brushed the dust off his worn leather saddle, laid his hand on the scarred revolver at his side, and murmured the vow, "The West will never lose its wild heart." As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness stained the valley, and the oil lamp flickered in the small shack beside the barbed wire gate. The old cowboy sat pondering a folded map, recalling the first day he drove cattle across unfenced fields. He offered a proud smile, then slowly put pen to paper in his journal, the flow of time etched onto every yellowed page. It was not just the record of an era, but also the thread that linked past and future, legend and reality. Night gently embraced the west, and in the soft wind one could almost hear the lullaby of an ancient mother. "Listen, my child, this land still has countless untold stories, nameless legends and memories of a time when freedom was priceless." The night was so quiet that only the low moaning of cattle in the pens, the heartbeat of the writer as he recorded each line, and the echo of an era long past could be heard. Yet it lived on in the hearts of those who loved the wild. The western sky at dawn was streaked with a pale pink ribbon, while the dim glow of oil lamps in the makeshift station heralded the sunrise of the railroad age. The silver bell and steam whistle echoed across the hills, mingling with the still sleepy clatter of horses' hooves to compose the first sounds of a new era. Land that had once been reserved for prairie and cattle was now linked by gleaming steel rails, drawing people, goods, and hope into every small town. On the first train, loaded with 6 shooters, sacks of corn, and barrels of whiskey, Eastern migrants leaned against the windows, watching the landscape transform. They were land-hungry settlers, gold seekers, or simply families dreaming of building a home in the wilderness. Each station stop revealed a new scene: hastily erected Chinese labourer camps, tin-roofed shacks of pioneer farmers, and the fading wheel ruts of ox-drawn wagons. The clink of hammers fastening tie plates, the steam engine's exhalations, and billowing black smoke all celebrated the toil of countless workers. Cowboys, once accustomed only to riding the endless plains, now stood quietly beside the tracks, observing the locomotive surge by like a strange metal beast. They sensed that the world was changing faster than any dust storm, and that their place on the western map would never be the same. Not far from the rails, boom towns sprang up overnight. Lumber was sawn at breakneck speed, saloons lined the streets, and pawn shops and theatres hurriedly opened their doors to welcome visitors. Tales spread of Virginia City, Bannock, and Leadville. Once nothing more than refueling outposts for locomotives, now transformed into bustling centres of commerce and entertainment. Rice merchants, bank owners, and land speculators jostled for space in 2-story wooden buildings, asserting their power with glossy signage and frosted glass windows. Amid the excitement, cowboys still gravitated toward the bars to share stories. They spoke of their final cattle drives, of battles with Lakota warriors at Dry Fork Dam, and of the strange thrill of laying a hand on cold steel rails. Some sought work loading freight cars, while others invested in station shares. Their lives became a blend of railroad town glamour and the old customs of the prairie. On quiet nights beneath the faint glow of station lamps, country folk stepped into the Temple of Progress, the sturdy red brick depot, for the first time. Their eyes sparkled at electric timetables marking arrival times, as if this were a new ritual, the rite that connected the West to the rest of the nation. Some smiled sadly for lost freedom, others brimmed with hopes of prosperity. All recognised that the railroad carried not only cargo, but dreams and uncertainties. The trains bore more than passengers. They carried modern machinery, ploughs, deep well pumps, and even Singer sewing machines for the dressmakers. Many ranchers quickly adopted technology to save labour, while some old-line cowboys clung to their leather saddles, refusing to step into a world of industry. Yet whether they embraced it or not, each rail laid down left an indelible mark of irreversible change. That winter, the first transcontinental train officially carried passengers from Omaha to Sacramento. News of the journey swept through saloons and ranch camps, sending the whole West reeling. Fireworks, once reserved for national holidays, exploded in celebration of technology and ambition. Old cowboys raised whiskey to toast, tears in their eyes. Not from drink, but from realising they were witnessing a revolution where the clip-clop of horses was giving way to the rumble of iron wheels. Around that night's campfire, they recounted the story of the great iron monster, of workers tirelessly driving spikes through mountain passes, and of the whistle that announced a new reign. The wind whistled through the canyons as if comforting the wild land, whispering that no matter how far the rails reached, the cowboy's heart would forever beat to the rhythm of freedom and adventure. And as the train thundered toward the horizon, they knew the next chapter of the West, of industry, of towns, and of a blending of cultures, was waiting to be written by their very sweat and aspiration. The western sky at dawn was streaked with a pale pink ribbon, and the dim glow of oil lamps in the makeshift station heralded the sunrise of the railroad era. The silver bell and steam whistle echoed across the hills, mingling with the still sleepy clatter of horses' hooves to form the first sounds of a new age. Land that once belonged solely to prairie and cattle was now stitched together by gleaming steel rails, bringing people, goods, and hope to every small town. On that first train, laden with 6 shooters, sacks of corn and barrels of whiskey, eastern migrants pressed against the windows, their eyes trailing the transforming landscape. They were travellers hungry for land, gold seekers, or simply families dreaming of building a home in the wilderness. Each station stop revealed a new scene: hastily erected Chinese labourers' shanties, tin-roofed huts of pioneer settlers, and the fading wheel ruts of ox-drawn wagons that had slipped into the past. The clink of hammers fastening rail clips, the steam engine's exhalations, and billowing black smoke rose as a paean to the toil of countless hands. Cowboys, accustomed only to riding the endless prairie, now stood quietly by the tracks, watching the locomotive streak past like a strange metal beast. They felt the world changing faster than any dust storm, and sensed that their place on the western map would never be the same. Not far from the rails, boomtowns sprang up overnight. Lumber was milled at breakneck speed, saloons shot up side by side, and pawn shops and theatres raced to open their doors to visitors. Tales spread of Virginia City, Bannock, and Leadville, once mere refueling stops for locomotives, now thriving centres of commerce and entertainment. Grain merchants, bankers, and land speculators jostled in 2-story wooden buildings, asserting their power with glossy signboards and frosted windows. Amid the bustle, cowboys still sought out bars to trade stories. They spoke of their final cattle drive, of the clash with Lakota warriors at Dry Fork Dam, and of the strange thrill of laying a hand on the cold steel rails. Some seized the chance to work loading freight cars, others invested in station shares. Their lives became a fusion of railroad town glamour and the old customs of the open range. In the silent hours, under the feeble glow of a station lamp, country folk stepped into the temple of progress, the sturdy red brick depot, for the first time. Their eyes lit up at the electronic board, marking train arrivals, as though witnessing a new ritual, the ceremony that bound the West to the rest of the nation. Some smiled with nostalgia for lost freedom. Others brimmed with hopes of prosperity. All understood that the railroad carried more than goods. It carried dreams and uncertainties. The trains bore not only passengers but modern machinery, ploughs, deep well pumps, even Singer sewing machines for the dressmakers. Many ranchers eagerly adopted these technologies to conserve labour, while some old cowboys clung to their leather saddles, refusing to enter this world of industry. Yet whether they embraced it or not, each rail laid left an indelible mark of irreversible change. That winter, the first transcontinental train officially carried passengers from Omaha to Sacramento. News of the journey swept through saloons and cattle camps, shaking the entire West. Fireworks, once reserved for Independence Day, now celebrated technology and ambition. Old cowboys raised whiskey glasses in toast, eyes glistening not with intoxication, but with the realization that they were witnessing a revolution, where the clip-clop of horses gave way to the hum of steel wheels on rails. Around that night's campfire, they told of the great iron train, of workers tirelessly driving each spike through mountain passes, and of the whistle that proclaimed a new reign. The wind howled through the canyon, as if comforting the wild land, whispering that no matter how far the rails stretched, the cowboy's heart would forever beat to the rhythm of freedom and adventure. And as the train thundered toward the horizon, they knew the next chapter of the West, of industry, of towns, and of cultural fusion, awaited to be written by their own sweat and longing. The final sunset of the open range era dyed the last rays of light pink over the parallel steel rails and the wild grasslands. The early evening chill seemed to imprint itself on every cowboy's bones, reminding them that the old age was steadily giving way to the pulsing rhythm of a lively market economy. Where cattle-laden trains now stopped, farmers, merchants and investors gathered to form a new value chain built around one special commodity: beef. Major traders from the eastern port cities, New York, Philadelphia and Boston, immediately seized on the trend. They hired local agents to buy cattle, opening ledgers right on rough wooden tables in the warehouse offices. Stockyard stalls sprang up beside the station, where the owner stood by a French-style steel yard, recording each steer's weight and calculating any care fees. Every cow, branded and unique, was now certified healthy by a veterinary expert, entered into the books, and stamped with official approval before boarding the arched wooden rail car. In a crowded waiting room, ranch owners clutched copies of cattle prices weekly, trading information on sale prices, loading costs and rumours of a sudden surge in European demand. They compared spring prices, when cattle hadn't sold for more than 5 cents a pound, to nearly 10 cents now. Their excitement wove with anxiety, for they knew that a sudden price swing could leave them bankrupt if they weren't nimble. A few flipped open debt ledgers, planning to borrow more from local banks to expand pens and interplant corn for winter feed. A small bank at the corner of the tracks had opened only a few years earlier in a low brick building. Its sign read First National Bank, and a tiny brass bell marked the opening hour. Loan documents, livestock mortgage contracts, and even future contracts, a novel but tempting concept, were signed under the watchful eye of the bank manager. When a rancher paid interest on schedule, he retained the right to choose when to sell his cattle or turn them loose on the range. If he defaulted, the bank could seize the collateral. Across the street, Miller & Sons General Store displayed the latest ranching equipment: hand-cranked grain mills, galvanised water tanks for extra durability, and leather saddles imported from Chicago. The proprietor had paid for the exclusive agency of Western Gear Company, promising to bring the West the most advanced tools. Whenever a new shipment docked, the shop's sign proclaimed "New Arrivals, Special Prices," heralding a quiet revolution. Farmers could now save labour and boost herd productivity. Not far away stood the Union Stock Exchange Saloon, where speculators gathered each evening to bet on livestock prices. Candlelight flickered on carved oak tables, pipe smoke mingled with whiskey, and whispered, "Buy low, sell high" talk buzzed like an eastern stock market floor. Seasoned bettors crowded around wooden booths, marking out cattle, shares, each share entitling its holder to one longhorn, and haggling over margin rates. Many had travelled hundreds of miles from remote mountain valleys, chasing a chance at fortune in the cattle markets. Beyond economic gain, the bond between farmers and merchants deepened when the Farmers' Association formed. What began as a small exchange of ideas grew into the Western Ranchers' Journal, a printed periodical devoted to husbandry techniques, market analysis, and disease alerts. Membership carried guidelines. Every rancher had to commit to quarantine standards, administer vaccines correctly, and report any outbreaks promptly. This helped curb hoof and mouth mortality and ensure the quality of shipped cattle, boosting the West's national reputation. Meanwhile, private detectives like Alan Pinkerton spotted a new opportunity. They offered insurance on cattle trains, guaranteeing compensation for losses due to theft or accidents. Insurance certificates printed on cattle hide parchment and sealed in red wax bore hand-engraved signatures. Now, amid fears of price volatility, ranchers could rest easier knowing that if rustlers struck a cattle train, they would be reimbursed and have fresh capital to reinvest. That economic network grew richer still as packing houses sprang up in rail-linked cities. In Chicago, Omaha, and Kansas City, lines of industrial slaughterhouses emerged, with automatic killers and steel conveyors. Beef, once shipped whole, was now cut into primal pieces, canned and packed in dry ice before shipping nationwide or exporting to Europe. In return, the packing industry drew hundreds of immigrant workers, mainly Irish, German and Scandinavian, adding a new demographic layer to the West, those who built, ran and sustained modern livestock industry. Night fell, and the lamplit station gleamed more brightly than ever. Businessmen, investors and ranchers, though from far-flung lands, all converged at the Silver Spur Saloon, a blend of Old West charm and modern flair. A piano tinkled lively tunes, red wine glasses chimed quietly, and talk of cattle markets never ceased. Here they toasted, to the West, not only a wild frontier, but the nation's economic heart. As the station bell rang for the final night train, they quietly stepped onto the platform, listening to the iron wheels on the rails, then bowed their heads, envisioning the future. In each mind, whether plotting pen expansions or investing in railroads, the prairie wind's lullaby still drifted. The West might change, but its spirit of daring, risk-taking, and thirst for freedom would forever beat at the heart of this borderland. Summer sunshine filtered through the thick emerald canopy, painting the ground with shifting patches of light and shadow in time with the breeze. Across the vast Midwestern field, homesteads, small cabins and tents sprang up at regular intervals, the clearest sign that a wave of settlers was pouring into the frontier. They carried hoes and shovels, bundles of straw for thatching, sacks of corn seed, and calloused bare hands, ready to carve out a livelihood on land that seemed boundless, yet brimming with challenges. In 1862, when Congress passed the Homestead Act, hundreds of thousands of families from the East surged westward, eager to claim free land. They had only to file for 160 acres, live on, and improve it for 5 years, and then the plot would become theirs forever. The news spread like wildfire through saloons, small churches, and posters plastered at the train station. Young couples, with children in tow, threw themselves into cutting timber, digging wells, and turning over the red soil. This was a new portrait of the West. No longer only the thunder of hooves or crack of gunfire, but the ring of hammers driving stakes, the lullabies of settler women, and the delighted laughter of children. Yet this fertile prairie was long the domain of roaming longhorn herds and wild mustangs. When the first fences appeared, wooden posts driven into the earth, wrapped in barbed wire, the thunder of hooves abruptly fell silent. Some carefree cowboys still drove their herds across these fields, only to discover that barbed wire could maim a beloved horse. The sense of constraint was clear in their eyes, driving many young men to grab knives and slash at the fences, tearing out wires to protect their traditional trails. That resistance was not just human defiance, but the agony of a culture on the verge of erasure. In many areas, clashes erupted between homesteaders and itinerant cowboys. On quiet moonlit nights, families would awake to find their ripening cornfields trampled by drifting cattle. They would block the trail, brandish hoes, and summon private constables to report cattle rustling. Cowboys in turn would return, lassos in hand, shouting warnings for settlers to stand aside. A few warning shots would ring out, then both sides would huddle behind hay bales, awaiting judgment in the local courthouse. Sometimes only the state capital's courts could resolve the dispute, during which fences were cut down, horses impounded, and compensation claims mounted. Meanwhile, the indigenous peoples, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche, watched their shared hunting grounds carved into private parcels, fueling further conflict. They had tried negotiating for shared water and grazing rights, but the government largely ignored their pleas. When settlers pitched shanties on traditional hunting routes, retaliatory attacks followed. The Comanche ambush at Dead Man's Crossing claimed many settler lives and cast a pall of fear across the Faxamar region. Federal troops were deployed to erect forts, yet the presence of muskets and cannons only deepened the schism. One side wielded firearms, the other herds in a fight for survival. Amid these clashes, the role of law and courts became more vital than ever. Small towns hastily organised riding circuits, where judges travelled mounted to ranches and homesteads to preside over disputes. Cases over grazing rights, crop damages, and fence cutting were heard in rapid succession. Ironically, most complaints came from homesteaders, while cowboys often shunned the courts, believing that frontier justice held its own code. This ideological divide marked Chapter 4, a battle not only of weapons, but of conflicting views on property and liberty. At the same time, homestead communities began to take shape. Women formed quilting circles and exchanged hard red wheat seeds. Children built one-room schools together, learning letters and arithmetic. Itinerant preachers walked miles to deliver sermons and distribute opium for toothaches. Homespun dresses gave way to calico prints. Hair was braided and tied with dew-bright ribbons, and evening meals featured fresh pies, homemade cheese, and spring water tea. The sounds of rural life mingled with the echo of distant hoofbeats across the borderlands. In one corner of the homestead, a young settler named Tom stood beside his homemade plough, watching longhorn cattle drifting in the distance. He overheard cowboys speaking with the trail boss. They planned to gather for a drive through the nearby sorghum fields. Tom inhaled deeply and shouted, "This is my land." His cry rang across the sky, a declaration of the era. No one answered. Both sides understood that many battles, of ideology and territory, lay ahead. As the sun set, blazing an orange tapestry over the freshly ploughed field, Tom sat by the campfire with his wife and child. No gunshots rang out. Only the caw of ravens and the crackle of flames. In the firelight, determination gleamed in Tom's eyes. Whatever disputes arose, they would hold this land with their sweat, tears, and even blood. On the road ahead, the fate of the West, between cattlemen and farmers, would be written in future chapters by such courageous choices and their prices paid. After a long night spent wide awake guarding the new fence line, the dawn broke with the moisture of last night's dew still clinging to the leaves. On that wide field, Tom and the other homesteaders gathered around the broken fence. They saw horseshoe imprints in the damp earth, the trace of the longhorn herd that had just broken through, devouring the tender young corn that their families had tended all season. Curses rang out across the camp, mingled with the terrified cries of children. The scent of wet soil and the sharp odour of livestock still clung to every stalk of grain. At an emergency meeting beside the old plough, the homesteaders discussed how to reinforce the fence. They decided to stack 2 more layers of barbed wire rods before the main wire, and to set the post at least a foot deeper so the cattle could no longer shove them over. They dug a trench along the boundary, then leaned boards inward toward the field, turning any attempt at rustling into an impossibility, at least within reach of horse hooves and steer horns. Not far away, the old cowboys huddled under the iron girder bridge, plotting among themselves. They did not wish to confront the settlers directly. With their experience and cunning, they planned to herd around the ridges, targeting plots where the fences remained weak. They sneered at the idea of a little challenge for the fresh homesteaders, a game to stoke pride and the thirst for freedom. Yet behind their glinting eyes lay a flicker of worry. If a cow toppled into the trench or straw bundles slipped, they would face severe penalties. Amid the tension, occasional peacemakers emerged. One morning, Sarah, a determined homesteader woman, brought toasted bread and warm milk to the cowboys repairing the plough blades that had torn through the fence. She said, "We live on the same land, if you share the water source. I'm willing to let your cattle cross a small stretch each day, so long as they do not destroy all the corn." Her offer initially drew frowns from the sun-browned men, but then a few faces softened, and they agreed to mark horse crossings at set times so as not to harm the crops. Thanks to such negotiations, some areas grew peaceful. Fences ceased to be absolute battle lines and became temporary boundaries, marking peak grazing hours and peak farming hours. Children from both sides still crossed the fence, exchanging cornbread morsels and wild berries picked from the woods. Laughter and tears echoed like a bridge uniting 2 communities. Alongside the land conflict, homestead life gradually modernized. Combine harvesters, still rare but beginning to appear on larger farms, saved harvesting time. Sealed wooden corn bins, mildew-resistant, extended storage life. The bagging and loading process onto small rail service trucks also improved. Instead of carrying each bin by hand, folks used simple hydraulic lifts to reduce manual labour. These devices, imported from the East or Europe, sold through the Western gear counter in the nearest town, proudly stamped, "Helping you conquer nature." At the heart of this transition, a blending of cultures emerged. On Sunday afternoons in the small brick church, Reverend Morgan held prayers for a bountiful harvest and harmony among the residents. Homesteaders wore white cotton dresses, cowboy homies donned light leather jackets, and even a few dapper railroad merchants attended. The organ strains filled the hall, Western folk tunes blended with solemn prayers, creating a sacred atmosphere full of hope. At that gathering, they founded the Western Reconciliation Society to organise field days, horse riding contests, fast harvest competitions, and country dances where everyone could shake off tension through quadrille steps and fiddle tunes. Through these activities, social boundaries softened. Cowboys concealed their loneliness behind smiles, homesteaders hid their fears of crop loss with open conversation, and the indigenous, though participating less, were still present with a spring-inviting dance and traditional festival songs. Yet hardship did not end. The following winter arrived earlier than expected with brutal blizzards. The new fence, though sturdy, could not withstand thick ice and biting winds. Tom's sweat on the fence post turned to hard, immovable frost, and the cattle were forced into a cramped grazing area, causing feed shortages. Homesteaders burned straw to keep warm, while cowboys sought to reduce herd numbers to avoid starvation. Everyone reunited around the fire, sharing strips of jerky and bowls of hot soup to face the common freeze. When the snow melted and the topsoil cracked, Tom discovered a shifting pattern. Homesteaders had cleverly combined cattle raising with crop planting. In the cooperative grazing area, they interplanted forage grasses that both fed the cattle and prevented soil erosion. This model was quickly endorsed by the Western Reconciliation Society and adopted as the new standard. The very cattle that had once fueled disputes were now seen as a shared engine for development. In the end, though boundaries still existed as barbed wire and ditches, the heart of the West had broadened. The cowboys' spirit of freedom and the homesteaders' yearning for ownership no longer clashed completely. They shared a common dream, building a prosperous life in the wilderness. As the sunset bathed the already ripening field in rosy light, Tom and Sarah clasped hands, smiling before the last ember of straw in the fire, testimony to a future of cooperation and hope. The early morning sky still lingered with a pale pink tint along the edges of the clouds, as Tom and Sarah stepped out of their small wooden cabin into the damp straw dust heavy with dew. They walked beside the reinforced ditch where the rows of barbed wire posts tightly marked the border between the cornfield and the wild grass. But instead of the tense looks of before, the homesteader couple now gazed confidently upon the herd of cattle grazing leisurely among the young wheat. The posts on which Sarah had, just yesterday, inscribed the names of each homesteader, shared grazing area, now stood for mutual trust and shared responsibility, no longer serving as a barrier or battle line. Along the red dirt trail, a few vaquero-descended cowboys rode slowly beside the boundary, conversing with the neighbouring homesteaders. They exchanged advice, how to adjust planting density on ridges to prevent erosion, or how to use natural manure fermentation to fertilise the next crop. From the cowboys' strong lips came methods for composting without disease, while from the gathered homesteaders they learned to employ the mechanical harvester to quickly save the young corn before the first seasonal rains. Reconciliation took root in every step, in the cowboys' soft chuckles and the hum of water-pumping machinery. In mid-May, when the weeds and wheat reached thigh height, Sarah invited a group of homesteaders and cowboys into the barn for a small cooperative summer workshop. Inside, veterinarians demonstrated how to check cattle health, announce vaccination schedules, and introduce soil sampling procedures to test fertility. Meanwhile, Sarah and several homesteader wives shared recipes for creamed corn soup, fried cornmeal cakes, and fermented apple cider. So the cowboys would not only be well fed after their long rides, but also taste the homesteaders' genuine hospitality. When the school bell rang at the edge of the field, the children poured out, patched shirts slipping off their shoulders, eyes bright with excitement. They cheered when a small band of cowboys arrived, carrying leather banners stamped with the Western Reconciliation logo. Awards for Tom's contest, Who Can Call a Calf? Amid laughter crackling like the fire, the line between generations, between farmers and herders, grew faint, giving way to innocence and a shared thirst for exploring nature. Time flew by until the first harvest day in the shared grazing area. The wheat stalks turned a golden yellow, and the autumn breeze drifted through gaps in the fence, carrying the earthy scent of ripe grain. Tom, Sarah, and a caravan of homesteaders drove the cattle to the field's edge, where at the end of each wheat row, the herd nibbled the remaining grass. In the warm sunset glow, they harvested the wheat with a combine harvester, gears clicking as golden chaff flew everywhere. Beside them, the cattle wandered through each plot, not trampling but helping clear weeds in preparation for the next planting. That night around the campfire, everyone shared the day's bounty. Bowls of sweet, creamy corn soup, crisp toasted bread, and thin slices of smoked beef. Violin and mandolin music rose again, but this time the melodies were more reflective, a mix of vaquero folk tunes and the gentle lilt of homestead country songs. They raised their cups in celebration, not only of a bountiful harvest, but of the spirit of cooperation that had overcome every boundary. On every face shone the conviction that, no matter how much the West might change, the spirit of freedom and the desire to work together would endure, forging a future both prosperous and compassionate. In the closing decades of the 19th century, as the West settled under the twin engines of the railroad and homestead, a new phenomenon emerged: the rise of vast ranching empires, the cattle barons. These men controlled tens of thousands of acres and herds numbering in the thousands. No longer free-roaming cowboys on the open plains, they became a new breed of entrepreneur, meticulous about cost accounting, comfortable borrowing from banks, and keen to partner with meat-packing plants to maximize profits. On a sprawling ridge straddling Texas and Oklahoma, King Ranch rose like a kingdom. Its founder, Richard King, had started with a small parcel on the Rio Grande, but swiftly expanded by purchasing abandoned ranches and absorbing the grazing rights of weaker homesteaders and native peoples. Beneath the red dust of dry seasons, teams of cowboys lived in secure, barbed wire enclosures, dedicated solely to counting, caring for, and breeding stock. Their breeding program was ruthlessly scientific. Robust longhorn bulls were mated to thick marbled Angus cows, producing an F1 generation both hardy in extreme climates and prized for superior beef quality. Meanwhile, on the Panhandle, XIT Ranch grew to over 1 million acres, then the world's largest. Brothers Thomas John and Elihu C. Farwell secured a land grant from the Texas government in exchange for providing security and census services to frontier settlements. XIT cattle, a Brahman Longhorn cross imported from India, could range for hundreds of miles with minimal feed. But XIT's true innovation lay not just in scale, but in industrial management. Centralised headquarters, airtight accounting ledgers, and a network of wagon roads connecting satellite ranches, akin to a banking branch network. With operations so enormous, traditional cattle drives gave way to specialised livestock trains. Enclosed cars, reinforced with steel mesh and fitted with drainage, were designed to reduce stress on the cattle. A veterinarian travelled on each train, vaccinating against rabies and cholera, inspecting every animal and recording details in a pocket-sized journal. When these trains departed from Amarillo or San Antonio, they carried not only cattle, but the business ambitions of the barons, each shipment representing a bank loan, an export contract to Europe, or a bulk order from Chicago packing plants. Meat packing houses also modernised at breakneck speed. In South Omaha and the Chicago stockyards, beef ran on continuous 24/7 lines. Automatic slaughter machines, stainless steel conveyors, and liquid nitrogen dry ice cold storage preserved meat for months without salt or chemical preservatives. The barons poured capital into these facilities to guarantee peak quality from domestic markets to London, Paris and Hamburg. Their newfound economic might translated into political power. Cattle barons dominated state legislatures, influencing land prices, tax rates and railway regulations. They funded the construction of depots, roads, hospitals and schools, while lobbying for low grazing fees and minimal livestock taxes. At lavish outdoor banquets held at King Ranch Mansion or the XIT Guest House, these magnates, clad in tweed suits and fedoras, hosted politicians, journalists and attorneys, negotiating deals that shaped national agricultural policy. Yet this Gilded Age brought serious drawbacks. Intensive, fenced grazing rapidly degraded native grasslands, erosion spread, and invasive weeds outcompeted indigenous flora. Small homesteaders and native tribes found themselves squeezed out, losing free-roaming pastures and traditional hunting grounds. In response, early conservation movements sprang up, calling for crop rotation, prairie restoration, and water conservation measures. Even within the barren class, rivalries simmered. Families such as the Wagoners of Texas and the Bells of New Mexico quietly amassed land by acquiring state-owned or abandoned farms, only to be accused of misrepresenting actual acreage. Investigations by both Eastern newspapers and state authorities resurrected tales of land disputes, protracted lawsuits, and occasionally violent confrontations between rival empires. Amid this shift, the vaunted cowboys of old, once driving herds across untamed ranges, found themselves promoted to senior management, drawing hefty salaries and board seats. They had to master production statistics, file quarterly profit reports, and attend meetings in elegant hotel conference rooms. For many, it was a jolting transition, from sun-soaked nights around the campfire to the click of a typewriter in a corporate office. In that hybrid world, the Western spirit of freedom, pride and risk melded with sharp business acumen. These men learned to leverage capital markets, secure intellectual property protections on hybrid cattle breeds, and build personal brands, King, XIT, Wagoner, Bell, into emblems of quality and trust. Yet however many awards or branded goods they amassed, each cattle baron still carried in his heart the image of a cowboy by the campfire, gazing across his herd, lingering in the morning mist, and listening to the prairie wind whisper that the true West belongs to those who dare to dream big and boldly chase freedom. In the closing decades of the 19th century, as the West gradually stabilised under the power of the railroad and homesteads, a new trend began to take shape. The rise of vast ranching empires, cattle barons, farm magnates who controlled tens of thousands of acres and herds numbering in the thousands. They were no longer the free-roaming cowboys of the open plains, but had become a new breed of entrepreneur, adept at cost accounting, bank borrowing, and partnering with meat-packing plants to maximise profits. On a sprawling ridge straddling Texas and Oklahoma, King Ranch, the first operation to reach kingdom scale, towered as an era's emblem. Its founder, Richard King, had started with only a small parcel on the Rio Grande, yet quickly expanded by buying up abandoned ranches and acquiring grazing rights from weaker homesteaders and indigenous peoples. Beneath the red dust of dry seasons, privately hired cowboy teams lived in secure, barbed wire compounds, focusing solely on counting stock, tending livestock, and implementing advanced breeding programs. Their genetic selection was painstakingly rigorous. Hearty longhorn bulls were bred to deeply marbled Angus cows, producing an F1 generation both climate resilient and prized for premium beef quality. Alongside King Ranch, the XIT ranch in the Panhandle rapidly grew into the world's largest ranch of its time. Encompassing over 1 million acres, the Farwell brothers who ran it had signed a land grant contract with the Texas government to develop the frontier in exchange for providing security services and conducting local censuses. XIT cattle, Brahman Longhorn crosses imported from India, gained renown for travelling hundreds of miles on minimal feed. Yet XIT's true innovation lay not only in scale but in its industrial management model: a central executive office, closed ledger accounting, and even a network of wagon road branches linking satellite ranches, much like a banking system. With operations this vast, cattle transport no longer relied solely on traditional cattle drives. Special livestock trains, with enclosed cars reinforced by steel mesh and fitted with drainage, to minimise stress, replaced months-long drives. A veterinarian rode each train, administering rabies and cholera vaccines, and inspecting every animal, meticulously logging details in pocket-sized journals. Departing from Amarillo or San Antonio, these trains carried not just cattle, but each baron's business ambitions: a bank promissory note, an export contract to Europe, or a bulk order from Chicago's packing plants. Meat packing houses likewise evolved into industrial powerhouses. In South Omaha and the Chicago stockyards, beef processing ran 24/7. Automatic slaughter machines, stainless steel conveyors, and liquid nitrogen dry ice cold storage preserved meat for months without salt or bleach. Barons readily invested huge capital to ensure their products reached customers, from domestic markets to London, Paris, and Hamburg, in peak condition. This scale brought political power shifts. Cattle barons became dominant forces in numerous states, controlling land prices, tax rates, and even seats in state legislatures. They funded the construction of train depots, roads, hospitals, and schools, while lobbying to keep grazing fees low and livestock taxes minimal. At lavish outdoor banquets at King Ranch Mansion or the XIT Guest House, these magnates, in tweed suits and fedoras, entertained politicians, journalists, and lawyers, negotiating deals that would shape national agricultural policy. Yet amid the glory and massive profits, the cattle baron era brought significant consequences. Confining enormous herds within fenced areas led to accelerated degradation of native grasslands. Erosion spread, and invasive weeds displaced indigenous species. Small homesteaders and indigenous communities bore the brunt. They lost free-range grazing lands and safe areas for hunting or farming. A chain reaction ensued, sparking the first environmental conservation movements, with voices calling for crop rotation, prairie restoration, and water source protection. Even within the barren elite, power and prestige struggles quietly simmered. Families like Wagoner Ranch in Texas or Bell Ranch in New Mexico, who expanded by purchasing public lands and abandoned farms, faced accusations of misrepresenting their actual land use. Investigations by Eastern newspapers and state authorities revived stories of land claim conflicts, protracted lawsuits, and occasionally violent confrontations among rival barons representing different interests. Meanwhile, top cowboys, once driving herds across the untamed range, found themselves promoted to senior management roles, receiving handsome salaries and board seats. They had to master production metrics, file quarterly profit reports, and attend meetings in upscale hotel conference rooms. For many, it marked a turning point, from a sun-baked nomadic life to an office routine of ledgers and typewriters, from the train whistle's call to the click of a typewriter key. In that blended space, the Western spirit, freedom, pride, adventure, gradually merged with shrewd business savvy. These men learned to leverage capital markets, apply intellectual property law to hybrid cattle breeds, and build personal brands, King, XIT, Wagoner, Bell, into symbols of quality and trust. Yet however many awards, medals, or branded products they amassed, deep in every cattle baron's heart remained the image of a cowboy by the campfire, gazing at his herd, shimmering in the morning mist, listening to the prairie wind whisper that the true West belongs to those bold enough to dream big and pursue their freedom. As the last golden rays of an autumn afternoon streamed through the large window of King Ranch Mansion, the hush seemed to pause to listen to the whispers of memory. More than a decade had passed since the first cattle train departed the station, and the cattle baron empires had reached their zenith, only to slowly enter a challenging new chapter. Outside, fields stretched under the crisp breeze, with rows of invasive grasses intermingling with the few remaining patches of native prairie. Inside, warm offices echoed with the clatter of typewriters and ringing telephones, signalling an economy spiralling into financial stress. The global economic crisis touched this prosperous valley with a silent storm. Beef prices plummeted, transportation and labour costs soared, and bank debts fell into default. Many veteran ranchers, once steady-handed with reins, now faced urgent liquidity demands from the East. They signed second mortgages, even pledging the breeding rights to their prized F1 cattle crosses that had made headlines in Europe. In the boardroom, bank presidents' eyes betrayed deep worry. In the pens, the cattle quietly grazed, unaware of the dry figures haunting their owners. Amid hardship, agricultural cooperatives proved their strength. Farmers and ranchers banded together to share feed purchasing costs, upgrade barns, and jointly invest in a local packing plant. They rebuilt trust under the motto, "If one loses, the whole group must win," the flaming heart of the Western spirit. At weekend meetings around the long wooden table in a cold storage meeting room, spirited debates on marketing strategies, premium cut distribution, and even direct exports to France and Germany filled the air. Under the warm lamplight, they glimpsed a brighter future, tempered by sharpened resolve and a more stringent sharing of power. Meanwhile, the small ranch movement, mid-sized, ecologically diverse operations, began to flourish. Young families raised in the shadow of the cattle barons chose to leave the complex corporate world for a simpler life. A few hundred acres combining livestock, vegetable gardening, and dairy goats. They branded themselves from the prairie, adopting windmill silhouettes and a small longhorn logo to appeal to urban consumers. City dwellers, though accustomed to bustling streets, eagerly savoured natural, chemical-free steaks with authentic Western flavour. Environmental concerns likewise found a more earnest voice. Scientists organised a prairie restoration symposium in Amarillo, inviting soil experts, ecologists, and seasoned ranchers to discuss techniques for replanting native grasses, channeling natural water flows through pastures, and creating wildlife corridors. They developed multifunctional restoration models, cattle grazing alongside beekeeping, and wildflower plantings to conserve butterflies, birds, and rabbits. Formerly barbed wire fenced lands reopened into a restoration canvas, with old trails refitted for equestrian and pedestrian use beneath rows of weeping willows. Yet above all, the story remained about people. Many former cowboys, now in their twilight years, gathered by campfires to recall the smell of tobacco smoke, thundering hooves, and freezing full moon nights. They gazed gently at the next generation. Freedom meant not only riding the open range, but also choosing one's path, whether in the saddle or behind a desk. The link between past and future lived on through simple guitar ballads, sepia-toned photographs of cattle on the ridge, and dog-eared journals stained with the blood of the first orphaned calf saved by a wounded rider. That winter, when a light snow dusted the barns and the withered grasses stood brittle and pale, the West seemed to pause after its long journey. The windmill blades stood still. Icy gusts whistled through cracks in the boards, and the steam whistles of the packing plants fell silent for the holiday. Families gathered at the table, corn soup laced with smoked beef, sweet cornbread, and cups of spiced apple cider. They shared tales of successes and failures, exchanged plans for the next season, and vowed, no matter how the world changed, the West would always need its stories of solitary wanderings, of the desire to master nature, and of humanity's warmth by the fireside. When the morning mist cleared, the horses neighed anew, and the cattle shuffled back into the pasture. Figures emerged, farmhands bearing hoes, well drillers with augers, baskets of turnips and freshly signed contracts. At history's crossroads, past and present, wilderness and civilization, freedom and responsibility, they chose to move forward, preserving the Western spirit while wisely applying knowledge and sustainable practices. That, truly, was the legacy of the cattle baron era. Not just vast lands and massive herds, but transformation itself, and the enduring pride of those who dared to dream big and pursue their freedom. The early 20th century western sky was no longer simply the untamed expanse of endless prairie. The hiss of steam engines had receded into memory, yielding to the putt-putt of the first automobiles and the roar of diesel engines on livestock trucks. The mechanization revolution began to seep into every ranch, profoundly transforming production methods and the image of the traditional cowboy. On the dusty road between Amarillo and Lubbock, 1910, Ford Model Ts began appearing alongside remaining saddles and wagons. At first, many ranchers and cowboys doubted them. How could one trust an iron machine that didn't breathe like a horse? But as harvest seasons lengthened and transport volumes swelled, they had to experiment. The first trucks often broke down mid-route, forcing drivers and cowboys to stop, patch tyres, re-spark ignitions, and pump up tyres. Hoarse laughter rang out as they huddled in the field, under headlights illuminating a corner of the training ground, both curious and excited about a future no longer entirely dependent on horsepower. Alongside mechanization, the oil industry began to penetrate deep into the West. In 1901, when the Spindletop well in Texas erupted like an oil volcano, the previously parched land suddenly became the focus of investors. The pounding of drilling rigs echoed across the region, replacing the steady clip-clop of horse hooves. Many ranchers, having long accumulated capital from livestock, decided to drill test wells in their backyards. Small oil wells complete with storage tanks and large reservoirs sprang up near cattle corrals, creating a new revenue stream. Oil slicks mottled the dry grass, producing an uncanny scene, cattle grazing contentedly amid oil derricks and gleaming steel pipelines. The oil boom not only enriched a select few ranchers, but also provided employment for thousands of workers drawn from across the country. Oil camps, temporary worker settlements built of plywood and tin, sprouted between homesteads and ranches. There, Mexican vaqueros, black cowboys, European immigrants, and even city youths gathered to form a makeshift, yet vibrant community. The putt-putt of engines became the new industrial soundtrack, and whiskey gave way to cold beer in drilling site bars. The heart of the West came to beat in two rhythms, one paced by saddle horses, the other by machines and oil. With oil came better roads. The Good Roads movement, launched in the Northeast, funded highways nationwide, including the legendary Route 66. The first paved stretches appeared in Oklahoma and Texas in the late 1920s, shortening the drive from ranch to town. Locations that now boasted gas stations, garages, and grocery stores stocked with American imports. Automobiles, trucks, and even motorbuses gradually replaced horse-drawn wagons for hauling goods, patrolling borders, and even supporting travelling rodeo shows. Rodeo, a comprehensive test of cowboy skills, entered its golden era alongside these changes. Once a simple folk pastime at small fairs, by the 1920s rodeos were large-scale events with wooden grandstands, steel-fenced arenas, and cash prizes. Competitions in bull riding, tie-down roping, and saddle bronc riding drew professional cowboys who travelled by car or cattle trailer to showcase animal taming skills and daredevil feats before thousands, sparking a nationwide Western cultural phenomenon. Yet modernization was not always smooth. In the winter of 1917, the sudden armistice blizzard dumped over 2 feet of snow and brought days-long storms. Rail lines froze, truck fuel systems iced up, and many herds starved or froze along the roads. Cowboys and oil engineers used mechanized plows to unearth carcasses from drifts and built large charcoal fires to keep workers and livestock alive. This brutal event served as a stark reminder that no matter the technology, the West remained at the mercy of nature. At the same time, World War I erupted in Europe. Demand for beef and livestock surged to feed the armies, spurring ranchers and cattle barons to boost production. With many young men enlisting, large ranches hired more women, cowgirls, to ride, tend cattle, and operate farm machinery. Western women for the first time held key production roles, mastering tractors, combine harvesters, and even driving trucks. The cowgirl, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, jacket, and jeans while skillfully lassoing, became a symbol of Western resilience and adaptability. When the war ended, returning soldiers brought mechanical expertise and a hunger for innovation. Many remained on the ranch. Mechanics became tractor technicians, and oil field engineers turned to optimizing automated livestock operations. Under the glow of kerosene lamps and the glare of the first diesel locomotives, the West embraced both its nomadic heritage and modern aspirations, a land where horse hooves now shared the sunset with engine roars, and the cowboy spirit still rang out amid wind turbines and vast oil rigs. The first paved roads wound through the meadows and sparse woodlands, bringing cars and trucks all the way to remote ranches. On weekend mornings, black smoke from Ford and Dodge exhausts mingled with the dew still clinging to the horses' backs. Cowboys and cowgirls stood at the roadside, waving to the convoy carrying new breeding stock, robust Angus Holstein calves, crossing the iron bridge over the creek. When the vehicle stopped, they lifted each calf with steel tongs, gently set it down on the grass behind a saddle, and despite its dry neigh, led it into the heated pen. The trucks didn't just carry calves, they delivered diesel fuel, lubricants, and machine spare parts right to the barn doors. New-style gas stations sprang up at ranch entrances, replacing the makeshift oil pits of the previous decade. Mechanics placed 200-litre oil drums beside the combine, installed high-performance air filters, and test-ran engines in the experimental field. The engine's roar then softened and smoothed out, reducing smoke and noise, a sign that the mechanization revolution was no longer simply about convenience, but also about sustainability and environmental stewardship. Amid this transformation, the inaugural Midland Equipment Fair was held in Odessa. Booths featuring Fordson plows, John Deere combines, and the first robotic harvesters drew thousands of visitors. Cowboys in plaid shirts and knee-torn jeans watched raptly as self-driving machines were demonstrated via joystick controls. The announcer's clipped voice introducing the 4.0 automated farming system left many, though still devoted to saddles and lassos, astounded by machines that could find furrows, count calves, and apply fertilizer all on their own. Meanwhile, in oil fields, next-generation drilling rigs, 20-metre steel, towers with electronic control panels, gradually replaced the rickety wooden derricks. Workers wearing safety goggles and insulated gloves operated automatic valves by lever, monitoring pressure readouts on digital displays. The hiss of high-pressure flow became the steady pulse of a tightly regulated industry. Everyone knew that a single safety lapse could trigger an explosion powerful enough to destroy a ranch and cost lives. Between these two currents, agriculture and oil, the livestock auctions also moved to on-site video streaming. Each auction was staged in the town hall, but the hammer strikes and bidding calls were broadcast live to broker offices in Dallas, Houston, and even Los Angeles. An old cowboy sat before a black and white screen, clicking bids while still holding his worn leather lasso. Buying calves, horses, or dairy cows became swift, transparent, and nationally competitive. Yet many still missed the suspense of the hammer echoing across the fairgrounds. On full moon nights when the power grid flickered and some ranches still depended on diesel generators, cowboys gathered around campfires at a makeshift site by the highway. They shared stories of the first truck conquering Guadalupe Pass, of the day the flood swept a combine away and how they towed it back, and of the wild boar that broke into a calf pen and shattered a solar panel. Electric guitar and harmonica blended with their rustic singing, bridging two generations, one that rode horses across the plains, and today's generation that drives cars across the highways. The 1930s opened a sorrowful lament for the West when the global economic crisis and the Dust Bowl struck like a violent sandstorm. The plains of Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas, once realms of fine red soil and thick grass, had become a parched sea of golden sand. Winds whipped away every layer of topsoil, carrying seedlings off, burying ploughs, and clogging the oil filters of Ford Model A's. Farms, ranches, and small homesteads were engulfed in murky dust, leaving cattle, horses, and residents alike bewildered by a bleak future. In that context, the improved tractors, initially hailed as symbols of conquering nature, actually accelerated the depletion of topsoil as people overused mechanization to expand cultivation. Many ranchers, unable to shoulder further bank debt, were forced to sell off tractors and trucks and return to simple riding saddles and hand ploughs. They began replanting native grasses at the recommendation of experts from the government's newly established Soil Conservation Service. By fencing off plots to protect the soil, intercropping legumes to retain moisture and humus, lands once resonant with engine roars slowly turned green again, lifting the West from its Dust Bowl stigma. Cowboy life transformed as well. The veterans, once riding bulls in dusty rodeos, now sat by their radios each evening to listen to transcontinental roundup broadcasts. The warm-voiced announcer not only read corn and calf prices, but also provided play-by-play of matches from Fort Worth's circular arena. They admitted that sometimes it felt more thrilling than fleeing the swirling dust, for the radio seemed to link their spirits with cowboy communities around the globe. Hollywood, meanwhile, enshrined the West in legend when Oklahoma and Stagecoach premiered, depicting wind-swept ranches, majestic stagecoaches on dusty trails, and leather-clad heroes riding into battle. Tourists flocked to Amarillo, El Paso, and Albuquerque to hear country bands at the Silver Spur Saloon and attend rodeos under bright arena lights. Gradually, the cowboy image shifted from day-to-day labourer to mythic icon, forever framed in the Stetson hat, steel-toed boots and dust-worn leather jacket. In mid-October 1941, as the United States entered World War II, the West welcomed fresh waves of logistics troops. Ranchers donated land for mechanized cavalry training bases and sent bulls to the US cavalry to practice mounted parades. Western women, once cowgirls, took on new roles running generators at oil camps and distributing fuel to tanks. This fusion of horsemanship and mechanization demonstrated that despite changing times, Western identity would continuously adapt, upholding both its traditional and modern foundations. When the war ended, livestock trucks once more coursed along the newly paved highways, carrying hopes of reconstruction. Government subsidies and low-interest loans helped. Ranchers repurchased machinery, build silos for fermented feed, and retrofit barns for safer new feedlot systems. Grid electricity reached satellite camps. Automatic pumps watered grass and young corn. Halogen floodlights illuminated rodeo arenas until midnight. The West's image, blending steel gears, leather saddles and neon lights, remained a vibrant symphony, recalling a wild past, yet brimming with optimism for the future. And when the night wind carried the scent of dry grass and coal smoke, the radio would play Home on the Range. Whether astride a horse or behind the wheel of a new pickup, cowboys and cowgirls alike felt a deep gratitude. The West had endured countless trials, yet its spirit of adventure, the drive to conquer freedom, and faith in the land endures unchanged. In that very fusion, the early 20th century West found a new form, modern yet true to its roots, ever-changing yet unbowed. The first paved roads wound through the grasslands and sparse woodlands, bringing cars and trucks to even the most remote ranches. On weekend mornings, black smoke from Ford and Dodge exhausts mingled with the mist still clinging to horses' backs. Cowboys and cowgirls stood along the roadside, waving at convoys carrying new breeding stock, healthy Angus Holstein calves, crossing the iron bridge over the creek. When a vehicle stopped, they lifted each calf with steel tongs, gently set it down on the grass behind a saddle, and despite its hoarse neigh, led it into the warmed pen. The trucks didn't just haul calves, they delivered diesel fuel, lubricants and spare parts right to the barn doors. new-style gas stations sprang up beside ranch entrances, replacing the makeshift oil pits of the previous decade. Mechanics placed 200-litre oil drums next to the combine, fitted high-performance air filters, and test-ran engines in the experimental field. The engines roared and then settled into a smoother purr, cutting smoke and noise, a sign that mechanization was evolving from mere convenience towards sustainability and environmental sensitivity. Amid this transformation, the inaugural Midland Equipment Fair opened in Odessa. Booths showcasing Fordson tractors, John Deere combines, and the first robotic harvesters drew thousands of visitors. Cowboys in plaid shirts and knee-ripped jeans watched intently as self-driving machines were piloted by joysticks. The announcer's clipped voice introducing the 4.0 automated farming system left many, still fond of saddle and lasso, in awe of machines that could find furrows, count calves and apply fertilizer, all on their own. Meanwhile, at the oil camps, next-generation rigs, 20-metre steel towers with electronic control panels, gradually replaced rickety wooden derricks. Workers, wearing safety goggles and insulated gloves, operated automatic valves with levers and monitored pressure gauges on digital dials. The hiss of high-pressure flow became a steady pulse rather than a threat, a testament to an industry under tight regulation. Everyone knew that one safety lapse could trigger an explosion capable of destroying a ranch and costing lives. Between these two streams, agriculture and oil, the livestock auctions also went online with on-site video streaming. Each auction was held in the town hall, but hammer strikes and bidding calls were broadcast live to brokerage offices in Dallas, Houston, and even Los Angeles. An old cowboy sat before a black and white monitor, clicking to place his bids while still holding his worn lasso. Purchasing calves, horses, or dairy cows became fast, transparent, and nationally competitive. Yet many still yearned for the thrill of a live auction hammer echoing across the fairgrounds. On full moon nights, when the grid power flickered and some ranches still relied on diesel generators, cowboys gathered around campfires at makeshift sites beside the highway. They swapped stories of the first truck to cross Guadalupe Pass, of the day floodwaters swept away a combine and how they towed it back, and of the wild boar that broke into a new calf pen and smashed a solar panel. Electric guitar and harmonica blended with their rustic songs, bridging two generations, one that rode horses across the open range, and this one that drives trucks down the highways. The early morning sun had just crested the San Juan Mountains, its golden light dancing on the many ranches that the day before still bore tire tracks, now shrouded in a thin layer of dew. In the distance, a Dude Ranch tour convoy slowly crossed a field of rosy sunflowers, bringing city visitors right up to the corral for a virtual reality experience. Headsets showing a ride across Montana's wild prairies, then seamlessly cutting back to the real horse beneath their feet. The new generation ranchers held the reins in one hand and monitored data on their Smart Ranch app in the other. They tracked soil moisture, feed consumption, and each horse's heart rate via sensors embedded in the saddle. When the system flagged a newborn calf lagging behind, they received an instant alert to intervene. No more all-night watches in the field. A single tap would start the warming pump and switch on infrared lights. Beside patches of intercropped, naturally grown corn, a stretch of native prairie grasses curled around the pine forest, where a fleet of drones buzzed overhead, inspecting crops and cattle. From her farm office, Sarah, now an ecological specialist and CEO of Green Prairie Tech, directed the drones to spray biofertilizer on cracked soil patches and recorded canopy-cover data with imaging software. Those data helped her and the Colorado State University research team model a green corridor for migrating Canada geese. In the nearby town, the Young Buckaroo Club met in the large Letter B meeting hall on Main Street. Its members ranged from multi-generation ranch kids to a former Denver barista and a robotics engineer home for the summer, assembling automatic milking machines. Together they ran cowboy coding workshops to program robots that herd cattle across creeks, and data wrangler sessions to analyse 50 years of rainfall data and modelled drought trends. Over shakes at the cafe, the image of the rugged cowboy gained a new, tech-savvy elegance. Not everyone embraced technology so readily. Some veteran ranchers still held to the saying, "Only hands on the reins truly know the land," believing only human eyes and hands can sense subtle shifts in the air. Around wood-fired campfires, they challenged the younger generation, cross 30 miles of prairie without any devices, and lose not a single steer. When a drone scout warned of a wolf pack attack, they shut off their trackers, and still managed to drive the herd into safety with nothing but horn calls and cracking whips. Against this backdrop of opposing views, a fusion movement was launched at the county fair. It mandated that each ranch enter both the bronc-busting rodeo and the AI livestock monitor programming contest. The grand prize was a ranch and tech tour in Silicon Valley, an opportunity for cowboys and coders to mingle, learn from one another, and collaborate on the open-source Open Range platform to share sustainable solutions across the West. At the Cowgirl Hall of Fame's gallery, a modern exhibit filled the 360-degree space with drone footage of cattle running beneath a sunset, overlaid with hoofbeat sound effects and digital code streams. Visitors could stand on a sensory pad, adjust wind speed through surround sound speakers, and feel the warmth of a virtual campfire, an immersive preservation of Western memory for the digital generation. Yet the West still faced water tensions. The Colorado River, its precious lifeblood, was claimed by irrigation, ranching, and metropolitan demand. Water summit meetings drew delegates from Walsh Farms, Old Homesteaders, the Regional Water Utility, and the Environmental Protection Agency. There they signed the Colorado Accord, mandating a 15% cut in canal irrigation for each ranch during drought seasons in exchange for rights to recycled water from the treatment plant. As the twilight painted the distant mountains purple, RV convoys rolled into lakeside campsites, reservoirs regulated by the river's flow. Tourists pitched tents, fired up gas grills, and prepared simple dinners of family recipe grilled beef and cheese-smothered sweet corn for dessert. Under a birch tree, guitar harmonies mingled with lapping waves as they swapped stories of the West, from thunderous hooves to cloud computing, from oil derricks to solar arrays, from Dust Bowl recovery to the fusion of old school and cutting edge. And when night fell, under a sky thick with silent stars, every cowboy's heart, whether scented with smoke or bathed in the pale glow of a laptop screen, whispered the same truth. The West never truly sleeps, for it is an epic of constant transformation that still beats with the passion for freedom, adventure, and daring. Under the bright moonlight, the West stretched out across the interstate, and the rows of freshly painted white fence posts. Along Interstate 40, cutting through the Arizona desert, the steady hum of diesel engines sounded like the breath of a land that never sleeps. Yet just off the shoulder, among the cactus blossoms, sat an old leather saddle. A seasoned cowboy lit a neatly rolled cigarette and gazed up at the stars in silence. In the era of satellites and the Internet of Things, the West still guards its secrets belonging only to nature. For several months each year, dust storms sweep across solar farms, coating panels in grit before a late-day rain washes it away. In the Ranchland Reserve, experts still record mountain lions stalking prey, wild bison grazing peacefully on native forbs, and pronghorn, as fast as wild horses, leaping over electric fences. They quietly recalibrate fence lines and sensor frequencies, yet also install wildlife gates that let wolves and foxes pass, preserving ecological balance. On Colorado's high plains beneath towering ponderosa pines, the cowboy conservationists met to plan the Wild Horse Corridor project, linking traditional grazing lands to national parks so Mustangs could migrate safely year-round, away from dangerous highways. They used drones to drop feed and bottled water to thirsty bands of horses, and even blocked calf truck traffic to avoid conflicts. Heritage conservation had become a mission for the digital cowboy generation, where technology and harmony with nature ride side by side. In Albuquerque, the annual International Rodeo isn't just about the thrilling bull riding contests, but also an exhibition of new inventions. Remote-controlled robotic lassos, saddles equipped with rider heart rate sensors, and carbon fibre reinforced jeans that resist tears when gored. Spectators cheer not only with shouts but also with likes and shares on an AR app, turning the traditional arena into a global virtual stage. Young and old riders share the same ring, trading barbed quips as fast as keystrokes, then embrace after a perfect ride. Yet amid the modern exuberance, the West still wrestles with challenges. Falling beef prices due to alternative proteins, skyrocketing land costs driven by urban sprawl, and water scarcity that has become a matter of survival. New Mexico's College of Agricultural and Forestry piloted the Ranch Resilience Program, teaching ranchers to diversify incomes via nature-based tourism, from glamping in vaquero tents to guided bird photography tours. They even launched a ranch futures exchange for trading water rights, carbon credits and eco-tourism permits, integrating the West into the global green finance network. Then, at first light over the wildflower fields by Lake Mead, thousands of herons gathered, perching quietly on the natural cornstalks. A new generation cowboy, a young woman with wind-tangled brown hair and mud-caked hands, paused to pick strands of golden pipi grass, pressing them into herbal tea to share with the veteran vaqueros across the pass. They sipped its gentle sweetness together, then looked toward the horizon, where highways shimmered in the distance, where neon lights blazed through the night, and where the wild wind never ceased to whisper in their ears. Thus the New Century West embraces both hoofbeats and engine roars, the coarseness of lasso rope, and the fragility of fibre optic cables. It is no longer merely a land of the past, but a living mosaic of tradition and the future, where anyone bold enough to dream, whether cowboy or coder, can find their own path of adventure, guided by faith in freedom, harmony with nature, and the desire to conquer new frontiers. Under the vast western sky, where white clouds drift lazily through red rock canyons, stories are carried in whispered voices around campfires, and one man's name has become an unforgettable legend. He is called Silas McCall, for he seems to hold the very pulse of the frontier, from the dim light of dawn to the shadow-falling dusk across the grasslands. Silas's journey is more than a series of breathless horse races or evenly matched gun duels. It is a testament to ideals of freedom, honour, and deep compassion. Silas was born in a rickety wooden shack on the banks of the Pecos River, on the trail from Texas to New Mexico. His father was a Spanish vaquero, his mother the daughter of an eastern homesteader. Both lost early to a horrific cattle cholera outbreak. From early childhood, Silas learned to ride before he could walk, his tiny feet never touching the ground as he clung to the saddle, his eyes shining with determination. Comanche elders would later tell how, in his first dream, the boy rode a wild Mustang at full gallop across the Grand Canyon's cliffs, pausing only in a sky filled with sun and wind. Raised by his uncle, a former Confederate cavalryman turned professional big game hunter, Silas mastered the lasso and the dagger. He hunted alongside his uncle in Yorwee caves, learning to set wolf traps and stalk black bears. That steel-hard spirit was forged amid bitter winter's frost and the blistering heat of a fiery summer. Around moonlit campfires, his uncle taught him the way of the wind, the Western code. Judge no man by his outward look and never turn your back on what is right. As soon as he reached his 20s, Silas saddled up and left his uncle's ranch to make his own name. His only gear was a straw-lined saddle, dust-stained clothes, and a six-shooter at his hip. His first stop was the small town of Calico, where the cattle train paused after its long run. He did not come to sell cattle, but to Widow Parker's saloon. She had heard rumours of the young man's shooting skill. After just a few rounds of poker, dice, and target shooting, Silas fell silent in the saloon. Not because of wealth, but because of his confident smile and modest manner. Word of the ageless cowboy spread from Calico along the Chisholm trails, bars, and depots. When challenged, Silas rode in, not to pick a fight, but to prove to himself that honour matters more than any prize. In Dodge City, he strode onto the gun platform, paced his steps, sighted and fired in an instant, then laid down his pistol without a word. The crowd was stunned, not by his speed, but by his calm and restraint. Even under the heat of high-stakes gambling or life-or-death duels. Yet Silas was more than a gunslinger. He taught himself to read from tattered newspapers, using words as a razor-sharp weapon to settle disputes before drawing steel. In Abilene, he once thwarted a James Younger gang robbery, outwitting the outlaws into betraying their hideout so the lawmen could surround them without further bloodshed. Tales of the cowboy who outwits criminals became legend, making wrongdoers wary not only of his gun, but of his cunning mind. Along his path, Silas met many strong women. Jessie, a nurse who won his heart by binding wounds just in time, and Lean, the Vietnamese merchant's daughter who brought hardtack to migrant caravans. Yet few of these loves endured, for Silas's heart was always set on new horizons, where the wild western wind called his name by hoofbeat echo. In the next instalment, we will unveil a fateful chapter, Silas's crossing of the Salt River Trail through the Sonoran Desert, where he faces a savage sandstorm and must rescue a group of stranded homesteader women, and his unexpected reunion with an old nemesis, Mad Dog McGraw, in a backcountry town with only one saloon and a single outpost, where their destinies seem writ in advance. It is through these trials that the legend of Silas Time McCall will be etched not only in the speed of his draw, but in the undying humanity he carried across a West that never truly sleeps. Early the next morning, under the gentle moonlight, the group prepared to set out along the Salt River Trail. The sky was clear, but no one had forgotten the rumours of the Sonoran Desert. Fine sand that flowed like dry mist, salt frost that formed at midnight, and a sun that burned at high noon. The wagons, laden and swaying with hardtack supplies, carried homesteader women clutching trembling children, anxious in their eyes. They gathered at the banks of the shallow Salt River, its waters trickling slowly, when Silas Time McCall, now the anonymous guide, stepped forward and quietly said, "We'll cross here, then follow the wash northwest. As long as we stick close to the rocky dunes, we'll find shelter if the sandstorm comes." All afternoon the party pressed over towering sand ridges, stopping only for the oxen to rest, the wild grass already sun-bleached to pale gold. Silas reminded everyone to drink, to wrap their faces in turbans, and to travel in single file so no one fell behind. At dusk, a sudden gale carried fine dust, whipping small whirlwinds around the column. They hastily erected a makeshift camp, 2 tarps and a few bundles of dry wood, beside a dried-up wash. That night, Silas and a few men laid out the hardtack and shared a tin of sugary candies. But the most important command was silence. A single gust might herald a violent sandstorm. Amid the swirling sand, Silas used a glass compass pin to find their bearings, guiding 2 young mothers clutching infants, urging them to move without sudden gestures. When the storm passed, they discovered themselves in a small valley where the dunes were blocked by red brick cliffs. In the grey dawn light, old wooden planks jutted from the sand, relics of a Spanish trading caravan, centuries past. Silas murmured out faded inscriptions, showing everyone that earlier migrants had used this path, and some perished in the desert. With that lesson in mind, the party resumed their march with renewed confidence. The desert was a trial, but with Silas they would triumph. By midday, under the desert sun's scorching glare, the group halted at a dry well. Only a muddy puddle remained at its base, but Silas recalled his uncle's old teaching. Where water meets stone, trace the spring. He scooped out the mud with a spoon, filtered it through his shirt, and let each person sip a tasting. The grains of sand mixed in left a briny hint, proof that an underground aquifer lay close. Following Silas's guidance, they dug a small hole in the flat rocks and soon felt crystal water seeping upward. Cheers rang out across the desert, partly for the water, partly for their guide's skill. The desert crossing seemed complete until fate twisted at Dry Creek Junction, a ghost town with a peeling wooden sign reading McGraw's Saloon, and a leaning guard shack. There, Silas spotted the footprints of Mad Dog McGraw, his old foe, abandoned in Dodge City's shootout. Ring, now lying in wait for McGraw's enormous bounty. Mad Dog, his scarred visage twisted in hatred, recognized Silas at a distance and sneered, signaling his gunmen behind the saloon's wooden wall. Facing the threat that the homesteaders might be traded for McGraw's profit, Silas strode to the saloon gate in a low voice. Mad Dog, these people are innocent. I demand a one-on-one duel, gun against gun, to settle our old score. McGraw countered. If Silas won, they would withdraw and let the party pass. If he lost, McGraw would take Silas's treasured six-shooter and the horse he prized. Without hesitation, Silas aimed at the saloon's front post and fired 6 shots. Each round punched cleanly through the wood, scattering splinters. McGraw watched in silence, then nodded and signalled his men to retreat into the guard shack. In the crimson dusk, the showdown shifted from pistols to a test of horsemanship. Who could remain blindfolded longest, astride the wild bonus Mustang? Silas sat unmaying, even as the horse reared and bucked, while Mad Dog flailed and was thrown headfirst into the sand. Homesteader cheers echoed, forcing the defeated enemy to concede. Silas Time was master not only of the draw, but of the art of taming wild beasts. After the contest, McGraw presented Silas with the ebony handle of his own pistol, carved with McGraw's name, a token of respect, then withdrew with his guards. That quiet night, Silas stood before the abandoned saloon, pried loose its peeling sign, and marked its name on his worn map. He returned to the camp, nailing wooden stakes to reinforce it, and assigning sentries to guard against theft and predators. The next morning, as the party crested a red rock fork and saw the Gila River winding like a silk ribbon beneath the cottonwoods, the mothers whispered thanks to Silas. They descended to the clear spring and called it the Magic Well, for it was Silas's courage and clarity of mind that carried them through the desert's greatest trial. Silas looked on, his eyes offering quiet comfort. Their rescue closed a tragic chapter, but opened a new hope for a West forever alive with legend. Hand on his simple map, the path ahead lay obscured, but time and the shifting sands were on the side of those who dared to move forward. The next morning the group reached the banks of the Gila River, while dawn's mist still clung to every wild blade of grass. The sky was crystal clear, reflecting pale white clouds, and the river's flowing waters lay calm and mirror-like. Silas Time McCall did not rush to board the ferry. Instead, he joined the homesteader women at the shore, gently wiping sand-stained tears from their faces with scrap cloths. The sparrows chattered overhead, as if celebrating their survival of the savage sandstorm, and the fresh green scent of young rice grasses along the riverbank brought them an almost miraculous peace. As each dugout canoe touched the opposite bank, Silas greeted every person with a congratulatory smile and a warm handshake. He returned the ebony pistol grip, bearing the McGraw's saloon engraving to Mad Dog McGraw's widow, with the message, "Use it to protect your children, not to stoke old hatreds." That gift was placed reverently in the centre of her homestead tent, a symbol of mercy and the power to heal even the fiercest enmities. Stepping across the smooth stones, Silas led the party into the lush green mesquite forest, where a secret trail known only to the indigenous people wound through the trees. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, he told them the Comanche legend. Any soul brave enough to cross the sandstorm, yet still keep an open heart, would receive the armour of time, a token of unwavering spirit and hope for the future. Though his own coat was but a worn leather jacket, to the homesteaders it embodied something noble. True freedom lies not only in the saddle, but in conquering one's inner fears. At midday they came upon a small valley, blanketed in pippy grass and wildflowers. There 2 young homesteader sisters discovered a cache of seed corn, accidentally left behind by an archaeological team, wild hybrid kernels that had sprouted vigorously among the rocks. Silas knelt, pressed a hand to a stalk, and whispered a thank you to the earth before urging everyone to gather the seed. These kernels will sow hope in future fields, just as we sowed faith across the desert, he said. The women beamed, knowing that life always finds a way to renew itself, no matter how fierce the storm. Late that afternoon, as the sunset painted the cliffs in a ribbon of rose, Silas and the party reached the foot of the Sierra Madre Mountains. There, the livestock raft awaited, but Silas delayed the river crossing. He led them higher, into a small cavern fed by a hidden spring. By the light of a flickering lantern, he recounted how their Comanche ancestors had wintered here, nurturing the promise of spring in their hearts. He urged them to keep the cave's location secret, so that future generations would always have refuge when nature's fury arose. The next morning, Silas loaded only his bare essentials onto the cattle barge at the river landing and bade farewell to the homesteaders with a reassuring smile. Mrs. McCall wrapped him in a grateful embrace and pressed the Comanche turban into his hand. "You have given us hope," she whispered. Silas simply nodded and turned to step on board, leaving behind the silhouette of a legend forever walking the western lands. The barge chugged through the canyon toward Denver, where Silas had once briefly appeared at the Transcontinental Rail celebration. On that quiet station platform, his father, the Spanish vaquero, stood waiting, his salt and pepper hair glinting in the morning light. Father and son embraced in silence. No words were needed, for their eyes conveyed a lifetime of memories and pride. Silas's rescue mission had ended, but the legend of Silas McCall was only just beginning to spread. His name soon adorned the front pages of Western newspapers, next to the image of a battered saddle, a six-shooter, and a faded Comanche scarf. Folks said that whenever a sandstorm rose on the desert, or a new trail opened beneath the stars, you could still hear the echo of hoofbeats, a reminder that wherever danger lurks, Silas stands ready. And wherever Silas rides, hope and courage burn ever bright. The first dawn of Chapter 9 poured over the west like sweet honey, gilding the last grasslands Silas McCall ever traversed. After so many journeys, from the Sonoran Desert to the snow-capped rocky passes, this land had become as familiar to him as his own breath. But the story does not end with personal triumphs. Now Silas faced a final choice, between loyalty to tradition and the desire to blaze a new trail for the generation to come. The gathering place was Rosebud Flats Racetrack, an aging arena preserved as a living museum. The wooden grandstands creaked under the footsteps of visitors, mingling with the sound of high-tech saddles creaking on restless horses. The organisers invited Silas to serve as ambassador of the West, bestowing upon him a silver medallion engraved with a rearing mustang. In the exhibit hall, lined with images of Western legends, Silas bowed before a charcoal sketch of his youthful self, astride a wild horse, the symbol of the great journey soon to close. That afternoon, Silas stood in the sandy ring as the warm starting horn echoed. He did not compete. Instead, he welcomed the builders of the future, engineers, ecologists, and cowgirls from ranches far and wide to present their visions for the 21st century West. They unveiled the Green Frontier Initiative, farms integrated with grizzly bear conservation, purpose-laid prairie strips to support migratory birds, ranches outfitted with air quality sensors and automated on-site processing robots. Silas listened with eyes alight, though tinged with melancholy at the sight of his time-worn saddle. As the sun set in a blaze across the flats, Silas led the group to the riverbank pavilion, where a small crowd, homesteader families, Spanish vaqueros, black cowboys, and even Mrs. McCall, waited with heirloom relics, an old wooden plough, a Comanche lariat, and a well-creased map. Silas raised the plough high and handed it to the next generation, declaring, "Let this guide you when horses no longer serve as your primary transport, but also remind you that every journey begins with honest hands and a true heart." Under the first half-moon's glow, Silas guided them to the Pippi Grass Hills, where those miraculous seeds had first been found. He scooped handfuls of the tiny kernels, handing them out to the young ones as he intoned, Each seed is a promise of tomorrow. Though agriculture may change, hold firm to the roots of freedom and the spirit of adventure in this land. The children clamoured to receive their seeds, faces shining as if they glimpsed a brilliant future. That night, around the campfire on the plains, Silas leaned against a post and picked up his last six-shooter, the weapon once used to defend what was right. Gently he buried it at the roots of a great oak, praying that henceforth speech and innovation would take its place. By the firelight, guitar and accordion played home on the range, knitting together the nomadic past and the unfolding present. In the silent stillness, Silas whispered to the wind, "Time has given me much. Now it's time to give back to the land, to the people, and to the future." When stars flickered like candles of hope, he strode toward the eastern horizon, not to embark on another quest, but to let his legend merge with the boundless West, where freedom, daring, and compassion will forever ride alongside each new generation. The West like rosy syrup, gilding the pippy grass hills that Silas McCall had last traversed. After so many journeys, from the Sonoran Desert's furnace to the snow-capped rocky passes, this land had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Now, however, Silas awoke to a new dawn tinged with pink light, his brow beaded with dew that seemed to mourn the passage of time itself. The green frontier, innovators from the eco-technology camp, greeted him cheerfully, bearing test tubes of rejuvenated soil samples, fluttering butterfly robots gathering data, and a sweeping drone-shot mural of the new era's sustainable growth. Silas smiled and nodded in welcome. He understood that the West had become a fusion of its weathered past and an ever-forward stride into innovation. Together they descended into the valley beyond the ridge, where an underground spring gushed through suspended bamboo pipes feeding the hybrid cattle, no longer forced to cross the parched desert for water. The cool stream murmured like fresh first dew, affirming that, however advanced the technology, life's primal source would always be the land itself. Silas cupped his hands, sipped deeply, then gazed at the bright eyes of the young engineers. They were pioneers of the soul, knowing that safeguarding nature meant preserving the West's very spirit. At midday, Silas joined the group at a wind farm tucked beneath the mountain's flank, where giant blades turned lazily, like a clarion, called to a new way of life. In the control room, he studied output charts, emission reductions, and the kilowatts fed back into the local grid. The project lead invited Silas to press the green button initiating the trial run. As the fans spun up, their mechanical whisper rose in harmony with the plain's old winds, and Silas murmured, "The West has learned to ride the wind to survive, not merely to chase it in flight." By late afternoon, they reached a field of ripening wheat interlaced with bright wildflowers. Silas hid behind a cluster of blooms, plucked a kernel between his fingers, and felt its vigorous shoot, a living symbol of humanity and nature standing united. He recounted to the youngsters the autumn harvests of old, when the community gathered around the combine's smoky churn, thrilled by the bulging grain sacks and the children's laughter. Now the machinery still hummed, but under the banner of a reconciliation era, between classic and cutting edge. On the final night of the chapter, Silas led them to the summit of a pippy grass knoll, gazing out over the endless prairie. The homestead's faint porch lights and the wind-turbined silhouettes blended with starlight, forming a tableau of nature and technology entwined. He paused at an ancient boulder, etched with the names of fallen vaqueros, cowboys, and homesteaders, placing his hand on the weathered letters. "We must honour those who came before, but never be afraid to step forward. The West spirit is daring to cross the storms, laying down your gun to join hands and build tomorrow." As the night's last mists dissipated before the rosy sunrise, Silas and the party set out once more toward Denver, this journey's end, yet the legend of Silas McCall truly unfolding. He was not only the living emblem of a glorious past, but the guiding soul of a West standing at history's crossroads. And though time's marks would trail in his wake, his gentle smile spoke volumes. The West would continue on, powered by courageous hearts, boundless vision, and an undying love for its wild, endless land. The rosy dawn bathed the west in pink as Silas and his companions slipped out of Denver aboard a convoy of trucks bound for the wild country beyond I-70. Silas studied the broad map on his lap, his finger marking a tiny point, Badlands Ridge, where eroded limestone formed a remote labyrinth. "That will be our final stop," he told them. "There we will erect a memorial statue and inscribe the names of all who helped forge the legend of the West." Guiding the convoy along the old trail, the driver eased the vehicle to a halt before the entrance of a vast cavern. Morning rays streamed through the fissures, illuminating fossil remnants millions of years old. Silas stepped down, his fingers brushing the cool stone. "This is the Earth's memory," he whispered. The group fell silent, awed by its timeless grandeur. Homesteader women filled with tears, vaqueros proud, engineers clutching cameras to capture the sacred moment. A flat clearing in the heart of the Badlands was chosen as the stage for the unveiling. Representatives of the Comanche Nation, homesteader families, green tech entrepreneurs, and even descendants of Mad Dog McGraw, who had once gifted Silas the Comanche scarf, stood in a circle. In their midst stood a life-size bronze statue of Silas, mounted on a wild Mustang, reins in his right hand, left arm shielding his face from swirling sand. The statue's stone pedestal bore this inscription: Silas Time McCall, 1875 to 1955, Guide of the West. Symbol of freedom and unity, an ageless legend, riding forever with wind and sand. As the drape fell away, applause and tears echoed through the valley. Silas bowed, eyes glistening. He then invited a Comanche elder forward, who used a ceremonial dagger to carve a sun emblem into the plaque's surface, an enduring symbol of harmony between indigenous culture and the cowboy spirit. That afternoon, the party camped at the cavern's mouth. Local peat charcoal artisans led a rock painting session, Mustangs in full gallop, homesteader wagons crossing the desert, Silas drawing his gun in a duel, and Silas raising a handful of corn kernels on the plains. Each painting came alive as a vivid chronicle of the West's century-long transformation. When night fell, Silas hosted a small fireside celebration. Guitar and harmonica tunes blended with laughter and the clink of wooden cups under the stars. He invited everyone to share their favourite memory from the journey. The engineer recalled drones guiding lost cattle. A homesteader remembered drilling the first well in drought. A vaquero spoke of the scar healed by the armour of time. Each tale infused the night air with warmth and western pride. At sunrise the next day, as they prepared to leave Badlands Ridge, Silas handed each person a small limestone token imprinted with a horseshoe, a memento to carry back to the plains and distant cities. "Wherever you go," he said, "know that the heart of the Mi'ishomtog West still beats in every desert wind, every golden grain of wheat, and every step toward the endless horizon."